She stopped touching me in May, not all at once. That would have been obvious, almost honest. Instead, Madeline withdrew in increments so small I couldn't mark the exact moment her hand stopped finding mine across the dinner table, or when she started angling her body away from me in bed, creating a canyon of empty sheet between us. I'm a municipal systems inspector. My job is noticing things other people miss, the hairline crack in a foundation that'll split a house in two, the permit application that doesn't match the property survey, the contractor who's been cutting corners for 6 months before anyone complains. You develop an eye for patterns, for the small wrong thing that telegraphs the bigger disaster coming. So when my wife of 8 years started checking her phone with the screen tilted away from me, I noticed. When she began showering immediately after coming home from her marketing job, instead of collapsing on the couch like she had for years, I noticed that too. When she bought new underwear, expensive, impractical things that never appeared in our laundry, I filed it away with everything else. I didn't say anything. That's the trick people don't understand about observation. The moment you reveal what you've seen, you lose the advantage. The foundation crack doesn't care if you've spotted it. It'll keep spreading whether you point at it or not. Our house sat on Maple Ridge Drive, a street that curved through one of those neighborhoods where everyone pretended to be slightly more successful than they actually were. We had a 2-story colonial with good bones and a mortgage that made me wince twice a month. Madeline had picked it out 7 years ago, back when she still asked my opinion on things. It's an investment, she'd said, standing in the empty living room with her arms crossed, already decided. We'll grow into it. We never did. The second bedroom stayed empty. The home office she'd insisted on became a storage room for her discarded hobbies, the yoga mat gathering dust, the calligraphy set still in its box, the bread maker used exactly once. I drove the same route every morning, Maple Ridge to Ashford, Ashford to Route 9, Route 9 to the municipal building downtown. My office was a windowless box on the 3rd floor, crammed with filing cabinets and outdated computers that the city kept promising to replace. I shared the space with Tommy Brennan, who'd been doing permit reviews for 23 years and had the cynicism to prove it. Marriage is just a long con, Tommy told me once, feet up on his desk, working through a pastrami sandwich. She pretends to love you, you pretend to be interesting, and eventually you both get too tired to keep pretending. Then you just coast. I'd laughed then. Seemed funny at the time. June hit like a wet blanket, the kind of heat that makes everything sticky and irritable. I spent my days reviewing commercial permit applications, checking site plans against zoning codes, occasionally driving out to construction sites to make sure the reality matched the paperwork. It was mind-numbing work most days, but it kept me out of the house. Madeline had started staying late at her office. Big campaign launch, she'd explained, not quite meeting my eyes. Peterson wants the whole team pulling extra hours. Peterson was her boss, a man I'd met exactly twice at company holiday parties. Both times he'd shaken my hand with the limp grip of someone who'd already forgotten my name. I couldn't imagine him inspiring anyone to work late. But then again, I couldn't imagine a lot of things about Madeline's life anymore. We'd stopped eating dinner together. She'd text around 6 to say she'd already grabbed something, and I'd end up heating up whatever I could find in the freezer, eating in front of the TV with the volume low. The house had gotten very quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. The kind where you become aware of every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, every absence. On a Thursday in late June, I came home early. The Riverside Plaza project had been postponed after their electrical contractor failed inspection, which cleared my afternoon. I pulled into the driveway at 3:15 and found Madeline's car already there. The front door was locked. I used my key, stepped into the cool, air-conditioned silence of our house, and heard her voice from upstairs. She was laughing, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Light, genuine, the way she used to laugh when we first started going out, before marriage had calcified into routine. "I can't talk long," she said, her voice carrying down through the vents. "He might come home early." I stood very still in the entryway. The afternoon light slanted through the front windows, catching dust motes in golden suspension. Somewhere a clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. "No, tonight won't work," she continued. "We have that dinner thing with his parents. Tomorrow, maybe? I can say I'm meeting Rachel." Rachel was her college roommate, lived 3 states away, never visited. I set my briefcase down carefully and walked back outside. Got in my car, drove to the coffee shop on Sterling Avenue and sat there for an hour and a half, watching people come and go, nursing a cup of something that tasted like burnt water. When I came home the second time, Madeline was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with aggressive efficiency. She glanced up when I walked in, her expression carefully neutral. "You're home," she said. Traffic was light. She nodded, returned her attention to the cutting board. We need to leave by 6. Your mom said dinner's at 6:30. I remember. You might want to change. That shirt has a stain. I looked down. She was right. Coffee, probably from this morning. I went upstairs and changed into something she wouldn't criticize, and when I came back down, she was already by the door, keys in hand, phone face down in her purse. We drove to my parents' house in silence. Madeline stared out the window, her thumbnail working at the corner of her phone case, a nervous habit she'd developed recently. I kept my eyes on the road and my thoughts to myself. My parents lived in the house I'd grown up in, a modest ranch-style place in the older part of town where the trees were tall enough to arch over the streets. My father, Richard, answered the door with his usual economical greeting, a nod. He'd been a machinist for 40 years before retiring, and he approached conversation the way he'd approached his work. Nothing wasted, everything precise. Daniel, he said. Madeline. Hi, Richard, Madeline said, and I heard her voice shift into its public register, warmer, brighter, the version of herself she showed to everyone who wasn't me. So my mother, Joan, was in the kitchen pulling a roast from the oven. She hugged us both, told us we looked thin, insisted we were working too hard, the same ritual every time. Dinner was pot roast with potatoes and carrots, bread rolls my mother had made from scratch, iced tea in glasses that had been in their cupboard since before I was born. We sat at the table in the same spots we'd occupied for 30 years, my father at the head, my mother to his right, me across from her, Madeline beside me. How's work, Daniel? My mother asked, passing the rolls. Busy. The Riverside Plaza project hit a snag, so that'll drag out another month at least. And you, Madeline? How's the marketing world treating you? Oh, it's wonderful, Madeline said, her smile bright and hollow. We just landed a major account, a regional fitness chain. It's going to be a huge campaign. She talked about her job the way people talk about things they've rehearsed. My father ate methodically, saying nothing, his eyes moving between Madeline and me like he was reading a blueprint. My mother kept the conversation going with the practiced ease of someone who'd been managing silences for decades. Then Madeline reached over and took my hand. Her palm was warm, her grip firm. She laced her fingers through mine and kept talking to my mother about campaign strategies and client meetings, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was performance. This whole thing, the smile, the hand-holding, the animated conversation, was theater. You know, Madeline said, and her tone shifted into something I couldn't quite identify. Your son's sweet, but I'm still exploring my options. The table went quiet. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My father's eyes went flat and hard. Madeline was still holding my hand, still smiling, like she'd just commented on the weather. I let go. The sound of my chair scraping back against the floor felt loud enough to crack glass. I stood up, looked at Madeline, and said, We should go. What? Daniel, I was just... We're leaving. My mother's face had gone pale. My father sat motionless, his expression unreadable, but his jaw was tight. Madeline's smile finally flickered. It was a joke. I didn't mean... Now. I walked to the door, heard Madeline saying something apologetic to my parents, heard the scrape of her chair, the click of her heels on the hardwood. I was already outside, keys in hand, when she caught up. The drive home was silent, except for her attempts to explain. I don't know why I said that. It came out wrong. I wasn't thinking... I didn't respond, didn't look at her. Just drove with my hands at 10 and 2, watching the streetlights slide past. When we pulled into our driveway, she tried again. Daniel, please, can we just talk about this? I put the car in park, got out. She followed me to the front door, still talking, her voice climbing into something close to panic. I unlocked the door, held it open, and waited for her to step inside. When she turned to face me, I said, You're free to explore now. Then I closed the door between us, walked back to my car, and drove away. I ended up at a motel off Route 9, the kind of place that rents by the hour and doesn't ask questions. Paid cash for a room with cigarette-burned carpets and a TV bolted to the dresser. Lay on top of the covers with my shoes still on and stared at the ceiling while the neon sign outside blinked red, blue, red through the thin curtains. She'd rehearsed that line. I was certain now. The phone conversation I'd overheard, the sudden hand-holding, the perfectly timed cruelty, it had all been planned. A test, maybe, or just proof that she could. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m, I started making a list in my head. Not a revenge list. Not yet. Just an inventory of facts. Madeline was having an affair. She felt confident enough to humiliate me in front of my parents. She believed I was too weak or too stupid to do anything about it. She was wrong about that last part. By the time the sun came up, I'd stopped feeling angry. Anger was too hot, too reactive, too easy to see coming. What settled in its place was something colder and more patient. I drove back to the house at 7. Madeline's car was gone. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Not an apology, just a statement that she was staying at Rachel's for a few days. Rachel, who lived 3 states away and never visited. I crumpled the note and threw it away, made coffee, went to work. Tommy looked up when I walked into our shared office. "You look like hell." "Didn't sleep much?" "The wife?" "Something like that." He nodded, went back to his paperwork. Tommy understood the value of not asking follow-up questions. I sat down at my desk and opened my current files. Permit applications, site inspection reports, zoning variance requests, the ordinary machinery of municipal oversight, but I wasn't really seeing any of it. I was thinking about patterns, about the way Madeline had been moving through her life recently, the late nights, the new clothes, the careful distance, and I was thinking about how people get sloppy when they think no one's watching. Everyone leaves a trail, it's just a question of knowing where to look. Madeline came back 3 days later. I'd spent that time working double shifts, volunteering for every site inspection that came across my desk. The Riverside Plaza electrical recheck. A residential addition on Parkview that needed foundation verification. A commercial HVAC installation downtown that had failed 3 times running because the contractor kept hiring his incompetent nephew. Staying busy kept me from thinking too hard about what came next. Or maybe it just gave me time to let the anger crystallize into something more useful. She walked in on a Sunday afternoon while I was in the garage, organizing tools I'd been meaning to organize for years. Heard her car in the driveway, the front door opening, her footsteps hesitating in the kitchen. "Daniel," I kept sorting through socket wrenches. She appeared in the garage doorway, wearing jeans and one of her expensive casual tops, the kind that cost 3 times what they should because of a small logo near the hem. Her face looked tired, but determined. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "Don't be like that. You know about what." I set down a socket wrench and looked at her directly for the first time in 3 days. "Do I?" She stepped into the garage, arms crossed. "I stayed at Rachel's." "No, you didn't." Something flickered in her expression. "What?" "Rachel lives in Ohio. You didn't drive to Ohio." "I meant I stayed with a friend. I call her Rachel sometimes. It doesn't matter. The point is, I needed space to think." "And did you? Think?" "Yes." She came closer, and I could smell her perfume, different from the one she used to wear. "That thing I said at dinner, I was frustrated, okay? We haven't been happy for a while, and I just blurted it out. It was inappropriate. Inappropriate, like she'd used the wrong fork at a formal dinner. You humiliated me in front of my parents," I said. My voice was level, conversational. That seemed to unnerve her more than if I'd been yelling. "I know, I'm sorry, I really am." She paused, uncrossed her arms, tried a different angle. "But maybe we needed that. To be honest with each other. We've been pretending everything's fine when it obviously isn't." "Is that what we've been doing? Pretending?" "Yes." "Daniel, come on. When's the last time we actually talked? Like, really talked?" "Last Thursday. You were upstairs on the phone telling someone I might come home early." Her face went pale. "You were listening?" "I was in my own house. I was talking to a friend about work stuff. You're taking it out of context." "Was I?" She stared at me, and I watched her try to calculate how much I knew, how much I'd guessed, how much she could safely lie about. It was fascinating in a clinical sort of way, watching someone's brain work through a problem in real time. "I think," she said finally, "we should consider counseling." "No." "Daniel, I'm not interested in counseling." "Then what? We just keep living like this? Barely speaking, sleeping in the same house like strangers?" "You can leave any time you want," I said. "You made it clear you're exploring other options, so explore." "That's not..." She stopped, reset, tried again. "I don't want to leave. I want to fix this." "Why?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What do you mean, why?" "Why do you want to fix it? What's in it for you?" "We're married, Daniel. We have a life together. A house. That should mean something." "It did. Once." She turned away, shoulders tight. "You're being cruel." "Am I?" I picked up another socket wrench, examining it like it was the most interesting object in the world. "I'm just trying to understand. You want to explore your options, but you also want to stay married. That seems contradictory." "People say things they don't mean when they're unhappy." "Do they say them while holding their husband's hand in front of his parents?" She spun back around, and now there was real anger in her face. Good. Anger was honest, at least. What do you want from me? You want me to grovel? You want me to beg for forgiveness? I don't want anything from you. Then why are you acting like this? Like what? Like... She gestured vaguely at me, at the garage, at the space between us. Cold, distant, you're being weird. I almost laughed. Weird. That's what 8 years of marriage earned me, the privilege of being called weird when I finally stopped pretending not to notice. I'm going to sleep in the guest room, I said. You can have the bedroom. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Figure out what? Are we separating? Are we getting... She couldn't quite say the word. I don't know yet. That answer seemed to destabilize her more than anything else I'd said. She wanted clarity, even if it was bad news. Uncertainty made everything harder to control. Fine, she said after a moment. Fine, if that's how you want to be. She went back inside. I stayed in the garage until the sun started to set, organizing tools that didn't need organizing, running through scenarios in my head. The thing about being a municipal inspector is you learn how systems work, how they're supposed to work, and more importantly, how they actually work. You learn where the gaps are, where the vulnerabilities hide, where pressure applied at exactly the right point can bring the whole structure down. I'd been married to Madeline for 8 years. I knew her systems inside and out. The next morning I went to work and found Tommy already at his desk, coffee in hand, glaring at a permit application like it had personally offended him. Question, I said, sitting down at my desk. Shoot. You know anyone at the county planning office? He looked up. Specifically? Someone who handles commercial property records, site development history, that kind of thing. Why? Background check. For a thing. Tommy studied me for a moment, then shrugged. My cousin Janet works in records. She owes me a favor. What do you need? Information on a property. Nothing illegal, just public records pulled faster than usual. Give me the address. I wrote it down on a sticky note and passed it over. The address was for a building I'd driven past twice in the last week. A renovated warehouse downtown that had been converted to mixed-use commercial space. I'd noticed Madeline's car parked there on Wednesday evening when I'd taken a different route home from a late inspection. This related to your wife's situation? Tommy asked. Maybe. He nodded. I'll call Janet. Should have something by tomorrow. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. Whatever you're digging into, make sure you want to find it. Good advice. I'd already decided I wanted to find it. That evening, Madeline worked late again. I made dinner for myself, pasta, jarred sauce, nothing complicated, and ate alone in the kitchen while scrolling through property records on my laptop. The warehouse building was owned by a small real estate investment group. 4 commercial tenants, all small businesses, a consulting firm, a nonprofit administrative office, a design studio, and a law practice. I pulled up each tenant's website. The consulting firm's page was professionally designed but vague about what they actually consulted on. The nonprofit listed a board of directors. Third name on the list, Caleb Monroe. I clicked through to his bio. Early 40s, clean-cut photo with the kind of smile that gets used in HR training videos about workplace professionalism. His background was in corporate fundraising, strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, the usual nonprofit executive vocabulary that sounds important while meaning very little. Previously worked in development for a regional healthcare network. Before that, program management at some foundation I'd never heard of. Married, 2 kids, lived on the north side. Married. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of our kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. My phone buzzed. Text from Madeline. Working late. Don't wait up. I didn't respond. Around midnight, she came home. I heard her moving around upstairs, the water running in the bathroom, the bedroom door closing. I stayed in the guest room with the lights off, listening to the house settle around me. The next morning, Tommy handed me a folder. Janet came through, he said. Property records, tenant history, utility filings. That warehouse got renovated 2 years ago. Your nonprofit friend's been there since the beginning. I opened the folder. Nonprofit Advancement Services. Your registered address matched the warehouse. Caleb Monroe, Executive Director. Annual budget somewhere in the mid-6 figures, funding mostly from corporate donors and private foundations. This help? Tommy asked. Yeah, thanks. He leaned back in his chair. You want my advice? Not really. I'm giving it anyway. Whatever you're planning, think it through first. Getting even isn't as satisfying as it sounds in your head. Who said anything about getting even? Daniel, I've known you for 6 years. You're the most careful person I've ever met. You check the same permit application 3 times before you sign off. You measure twice, cut once, then measure again just to be sure. So when you start pulling property records and asking about people, I know you're building towards something. He wasn't wrong. Just remember, Tommy continued, you're not the only one who has to live with the consequences. I thought about that while I drove to my next inspection, a residential deck addition that turned out to be structurally sound but 4 inches over the setback limit. The homeowner would have to tear it down and start over. Rules were rules. That night I drove past the warehouse again, took a different route, came at it from the south side where there was a coffee shop with a parking lot that had a clear view of the building's entrance, bought a cup of something I didn't drink, and sat in my car with the engine off. At 6:45, Madeline's car pulled into the lot. She got out, checked her phone, walked toward the building. 30 seconds later, a man emerged from the entrance. Caleb Monroe, looking exactly like his website photo except older, more tired. They didn't touch, didn't kiss, just walked together into the building, their body language carefully casual, like colleagues heading into an after-hours meeting. I sat there until 7:30. When they emerged, they stood by Madeline's car for 5 minutes talking. I was too far away to hear anything, but I watched the way she laughed, the way he kept his hands in his pockets, the way they both kept checking over their shoulders. Finally, she got in her car and left. He went back inside. I drove home and went to bed. Over the next 2 weeks, I established a pattern. Not obsessively, that would have been too obvious. Just periodically. Random checks at random times. Tuesday evening, Thursday lunch, Saturday afternoon. Not every visit coincided with Madeline's schedule, which meant sometimes I was watching an empty parking lot for an hour, but often enough to confirm what I already knew. I started noticing other things, too. The way Madeline had gotten sloppy about checking her phone around me, like my presence had become background noise. The way she smiled at messages she thought I couldn't see. The way she'd started dressing better on days that ended with working late. By the end of August, I had a complete picture, not because I'd hired a private investigator or installed spyware or done anything dramatic, just because I'd paid attention. And now I needed to decide what to do with that attention. My father called on a Friday evening. Your mother wants to know if you're coming to the house this weekend. I don't know yet. Silence. Then, Madeline apologized, in case that matters. She apologized to you and Mom, not to me. That's true. He paused. You doing all right? I'm fine. Another pause. My father wasn't comfortable with emotional conversations, never had been. But he was trying, in his own way. If you need anything, he said finally. I know. Thanks. After we hung up, I sat in the dark of the guest room and thought about that dinner. The way Madeline had held my hand while saying the thing designed to wound. The way my father's face had gone hard and flat. The way my mother had looked like someone had slapped her. You're free to explore now. I'd meant it as a closing statement, a clean cut. But Madeline had taken it as permission. She'd gotten sloppy, but she hadn't left. Still living in the house, still wearing her ring, still maintaining the appearance of marriage while conducting her exploration in the margins. That was the thing that bothered me most. Not the affair itself, marriages failed all the time, but the arrogance of thinking she could have both. The contempt implicit in believing I was too passive, too weak, too comfortable to do anything about it. I pulled out my laptop and started making notes. Not a revenge plan, not yet, just a framework, a blueprint. Because the thing about structures is this. You don't knock them down from the outside. You find the load-bearing elements. You apply pressure slowly, methodically, in places no one expects. And then you watch the whole thing collapse from the inside out. September arrived with cooler air and shorter days. I'd stopped trying to make conversation with Madeline. We moved through the house like ghosts sharing the same haunted space. She in the master bedroom, me in the guest room, both of us maintaining a careful choreography to avoid spending time in the same room unless absolutely necessary. She interpreted my silence as sulking. I could tell by the way she'd sigh heavily when I walked past without acknowledging her, or the way she'd make pointed comments about how some people needed to learn to let things go and move forward. Fine. Let her think I was sulking. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. I'd started paying attention in a way I never had before, not just to Madeline, but to everything around her. The ecosystem she'd built, the people she relied on, the carefully maintained image she projected to the world. Caleb Monroe was careful. I'd give him that. He didn't post much on social media. His Facebook was locked down tight, his LinkedIn was professionally bland, his Twitter hadn't been updated in 2 years. His nonprofit's website showed him at fundraising events, standing next to local politicians and business leaders, always smiling that same professional smile. The nonprofit itself was small but connected. Corporate sponsorships from 3 major regional employers, board members who served on other boards, creating a web of professional relationships that probably felt impenetrable to someone like Caleb. He'd miscalculated, though. Being connected means you have more to lose. I spent a Saturday afternoon at the public library using their computers to pull tax filings and nonprofit disclosure forms. Nonprofit advancement services had revenue of about $800,000 a year, most of it from consulting fees paid by other nonprofits who wanted help with strategic planning and donor development. Caleb pulled a salary of $95,000 plus benefits. Not wealthy, but comfortable, respectable. The board of directors was small, 5 people. I recognized 2 names from the Regional Business Journal, another from a law firm downtown. The other 2 were less prominent, but still professionally connected. I photographed everything with my phone, saved it to a folder I labeled NAS Research, and went home. Madeline was in the living room, laptop open, working on something that made her frown at the screen. She didn't look up when I came in. "There's leftover Chinese in the fridge," she said. "Thanks." I went to the kitchen, reheated some fried rice, ate standing at the counter. Through the doorway I could see the back of her head, the blue light from her screen painting her profile. My phone buzzed. Text from Tommy. "Drinks tonight?" I typed back, "Can't. Got a thing." The thing was driving back to the warehouse. I'd started documenting everything now, when Madeline's car was there, when it wasn't, how long she stayed, whether Caleb's car was also present. I kept a log in a notebook I left in my car, times and dates, building a pattern, not for a lawyer. I didn't care about divorce proceedings or custody battles. We had no kids, no complicated assets worth fighting over. The house could be sold, the proceeds split, and we could both move on. This was about something else. Sunday morning, my mother called. "Your father and I are worried about you." "I'm fine, Mom." "You haven't come by in over a month. You don't return messages. Madeline says you're barely speaking to each other." So they were talking. Madeline had probably spun the whole thing as me being unreasonable, unable to let go of one thoughtless comment. Probably painted herself as the one trying to save the marriage while I nursed my wounded pride. "Things are complicated," I said. "Marriage is always complicated, honey. But you work through it. You don't just give up." I almost told her everything right then. About the affair, about Caleb Monroe, about the careful way Madeline had been dismantling our marriage while pretending to want to fix it. But my mother was a believer in the fundamental goodness of people, the kind of person who thought everyone was just one honest conversation away from working things out. "I'm not giving up," I said instead. "I'm just taking time to think." "Well, don't think too long. Life's too short to spend it angry." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of the guest room and thought about that. Was I angry? Not really. Anger was too hot, too reactive. What I felt was colder, more calculated. I'd started to understand something about revenge. It's not about hurting someone as badly as they hurt you. That's just violence dressed up in moral justification. Real revenge is about making someone face the consequences of their choices, about removing the comfortable illusions they've built around themselves and forcing them to see what they've actually done. Madeline had made a choice. So had Caleb. And I was going to make sure they both understood the full weight of that choice. On Monday, I took a long lunch and drove to the north side. Caleb lived in a neighborhood called Heritage Oaks, new construction pretending to be old, lots of vinyl siding and architectural shingles, lawns maintained by services, driveways with 2-car garages. His house was a colonial with black shutters and a red door. A basketball hoop stood at the end of the driveway. Someone had left a bicycle on the front lawn. Kids? He had kids. I sat in my car across the street for 10 minutes, watching the house. No movement. Everyone was at work or school. Just another empty suburban afternoon. I took a photo of the house and drove away. That evening, Madeline came home at 9:30. I was in the living room, reading a book I wasn't really processing. She walked past me toward the stairs without a word. "Working late?" I asked. She stopped, turned around. "Yes? On what?" "The fitness campaign. I told you about it." "Right. The big one." She studied my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Why are you asking?" "Just curious. You've been working a lot of late nights." "That's what happens when you land a major account." "Must be exhausting." "It is." "You should be careful not to burn out." Something flickered behind her eyes. Suspicion, maybe, or calculation. "I'm fine. Thanks for your concern." She went upstairs. I returned to my book and didn't read a single word. The pattern continued through October. Madeline working late 3 or 4 nights a week. Me documenting her schedule, cross-referencing it with Caleb's public calendar. The nonprofit posted his speaking engagements and board meetings on their website, probably meant to showcase his importance and availability. I started noticing the gaps. The evenings when his calendar showed nothing scheduled but his car was still at the warehouse. The weekends when Madeline was running errands for hours at a time. They'd gotten comfortable. That was their mistake. I began expanding my research. Caleb's wife was named Patricia. She worked as a middle school teacher, coached volleyball, had a public Instagram full of family photos and motivational quotes. 2 daughters, ages 13 and 11. The older one played soccer, the younger one was into theater. Patricia posted photos of Caleb at the girls' games and performances, always smiling, always supportive. The comments were full of heart emojis and "what a great dad" responses. I wondered if she knew, or if she was like me, noticing things but not yet willing to connect the dots. By Halloween, I'd compiled a complete dossier. Not because I planned to do anything dramatic with it. I wasn't going to confront anyone or stage some theatrical reveal. But having the information changed something. Gave me a sense of control I hadn't had before. Knowledge is leverage. And I was starting to understand how to apply it. November came in cold and gray. I'd been living in the guest room for 3 months. The house had taken on the atmosphere of a very expensive hotel where 2 strangers happened to be staying in adjacent rooms, polite when necessary, silent otherwise. Madeline had stopped pretending to care whether I was okay with her schedule. She'd come and go without explanation, sometimes not returning until after midnight, her excuses growing thinner and less detailed. Met some clients. Drinks with the team. Traffic was terrible. I'd stopped asking questions. That seemed to relieve her, but I was still watching, still documenting, still building the blueprint. On a Tuesday evening in early November, I drove to Heritage Oaks after work, parked on a side street with a clear view of Caleb's house. The sun was setting, that particular autumn light that makes everything look slightly unreal. At 6:15, Patricia's car pulled into the driveway. She got out, opened the back door, and 2 girls emerged with backpacks and soccer gear. They went inside. Lights came on throughout the house. Kitchen first, then living room, then upstairs, bedroom windows glowing warm against the gathering dark. Caleb's car pulled in at 6:45. He got out, grabbed a briefcase from the passenger seat, walked up to his red door like a man coming home to his castle. Safe, comfortable, untouchable. I took a photo of him walking inside, added it to my collection. Then I drove to the warehouse. Madeline's car was there, had been there since 5:30, according to my earlier drive-by. I parked in my usual spot at the coffee shop lot, settled in, and waited. They emerged at 8:20. This time they were less careful. Caleb had his hand on the small of Madeline's back as they walked to her car. She was laughing at something he'd said, her head tilted back, completely relaxed. When they reached her car, he pulled her close. They kissed, not a friendly peck, a real kiss. The kind that made it clear this wasn't just emotional affair territory anymore. Then she got in her car and left. He watched her go before walking back inside. I sat there for a long time after, not feeling much of anything. That was the strange part. I'd expected rage or grief or something big and dramatic. Instead, I felt a kind of distant curiosity, like I was watching a documentary about someone else's life. Maybe that's what happened when you saw it coming. The shock was gone, replaced by a kind of cold clarity. I drove home. Madeline wasn't back yet. I went to the guest room, lay down on top of the covers, and stared at the ceiling. Around 10:30, I heard her car in the driveway, the front door opening, her footsteps on the stairs, the bedroom door closing. I started making calls the next morning. The first was to a contractor I'd worked with on several projects, a guy named Nolan Pierce, who did mostly commercial renovation work. We'd developed a good professional relationship over the years. He was competent, reliable, and most importantly, he owed me a favor after I'd fast-tracked a permit for him last spring. Nolan, it's Daniel Hargreaves. Hey Daniel, what can I do for you? I need some information. Nothing official, just some background on a building. Which one? I gave him the warehouse address. Oh yeah, I know that place. Did the HVAC retrofit about 3 years back. Nice building, good bones. What do you want to know? The tenants, specifically the nonprofit on the second floor. You ever interact with them during the renovation? Nonprofit advancement services? Yeah, a little. The director, Mitchell, Martin? Monroe. Right, Monroe. Seemed okay. Kind of particular about noise levels. Wanted us to work around their schedule. Why? Just curious. They ever have any issues? Complaints? Nolan paused. Not that I remember. Though there was something... Hang on. I heard papers rustling. Yeah, here it is. We had to redo some drywall work because they wanted changes to the office layout after the initial build-out. Cost them about $5,000 in change orders. Monroe was pretty unhappy about that. He didn't want to pay? Oh, he paid. But he made sure everyone knew he thought it was overpriced. Left a pretty negative review on our website before we got it taken down. Interesting. Caleb cared about money, cared about his reputation, both useful data points. Thanks, Nolan. No problem. This related to a project? Just doing some research. After I hung up, I sat at my desk and thought about pressure points. Caleb Monroe's life was built on perception. Professional competence, moral authority, family values. The kind of person who got invited to speak at fundraising dinners and strategic planning sessions. What would happen if that perception shifted? Not through anything dramatic, no confrontations or public accusations, just small adjustments. Quiet pressure applied in exactly the right places. That afternoon, I created an anonymous email account. Not for anything illegal, just for information gathering. I sent a message to the nonprofit's general inbox with a simple question about their consulting services, mentioning I was helping a community organization explore strategic planning options. The response came the next day from Caleb himself. Professional, friendly, offering to set up a call to discuss their approach. I didn't respond. I just wanted to see how he communicated, what his tone was, how quickly he replied. On Thursday evening, I drove past his house again. This time, I didn't park across the street. I drove slowly past, noting the cars in the driveway, the lights on inside, the basketball hoop at the end of the driveway. Then I kept driving and went home. Madeline was in the kitchen, microwaving something. She glanced up when I walked in. "You're home early," she said. "A light day?" She pulled her container out of the microwave, didn't offer me any, went upstairs with it. I made a sandwich and ate in the living room while watching a documentary about infrastructure failures. Bridges that collapsed, buildings that imploded, dams that failed. Always the same root cause. Pressure applied to a weak point that no one had properly reinforced. That night I couldn't sleep, lay in the guest room bed thinking about the next steps. I'd spent months gathering information, but information was only useful if you did something with it. The question was what and when and how hard. Too aggressive and they'd see me coming. Too subtle and nothing would change. I needed something in between, visible enough to create real consequences, but indirect enough that they couldn't prove I'd done anything. Around 2 a.m, I got up and pulled out my laptop. Started drafting an email. Not to Caleb directly, that would be too obvious. To his board of directors. The subject line, concerns regarding professional conduct. I didn't send it. Not yet, just wrote it, rewrote it, refined it until the tone was perfect. Concerned but not accusatory, detailed but not specific, the kind of message that would raise questions without making explicit claims. Then I saved it in drafts and went to bed. The next day at work, Tommy noticed something was different. "You look focused," he said. "Do I?" "Yeah, like you've made a decision about something." "Maybe I have?" He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, be careful." "I'm always careful." That's what worries me. Careful people do the most damage because they think everything through first. He wasn't wrong. That weekend I went to see my parents. My mother hugged me too tight. My father shook my hand and studied my face like he was looking for cracks in a foundation. We had dinner, meatloaf this time, mashed potatoes, green beans. Normal conversation about work and weather and the neighbor's new dog. "How's Madeline?" my mother asked eventually. "Fine, working a lot." "She's not here," my father observed. "She had plans." He nodded and didn't push it. My mother looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. After dinner, my father and I stood on the back porch while he smoked one of his rare cigarettes. He'd mostly given them up years ago, but he still kept a pack hidden in the garage for moments when he needed to think. "Your mother's worried," he said. "I know. I told her it's not our business." "Thanks." He took a drag, exhaled slowly. "But if you need anything." "I know." We stood there in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally he said, "That thing she said at dinner, that wasn't an accident?" "No." "You know that?" "Yes." Another long silence. "You've got a plan," he said. Not a question. "I'm figuring it out." He nodded. Took one last drag and stubbed out the cigarette. "Just remember, sometimes winning means walking away. And sometimes it doesn't." He looked at me for a long moment, then put his hand on my shoulder. "Be smart." "I will." I drove home thinking about that. Being smart, being careful. applying pressure at exactly the right points. And somewhere between my parents' house and mine, I decided it was time to stop planning and start executing. The board meeting was scheduled for the third Tuesday of November. I knew this because nonprofit board meetings are public record, or at least the minutes are. Nonprofit Advancement Services posted theirs on their website with a 3-month delay, probably meant to demonstrate transparency while protecting ongoing discussions. I'd read through 2 years of minutes, learned the rhythm of their meetings, the standard agenda items, the kinds of issues they discussed, budgets and fundraising goals and strategic initiatives. Nothing controversial. Nothing that would make anyone question Caleb's leadership. That was about to change. On the Monday before the meeting, I sent the email. Not from my anonymous account. That would look suspicious. From a burner account I'd set up specifically for this purpose, using a VPN and a public library computer. The kind of operational security that probably wasn't necessary but made me feel better about what I was doing. The email went to all 5 board members. Subject line: Professional Conduct Concerns, Nonprofit Advancement Services. The body was 3 paragraphs, carefully worded. No accusations, just questions. I am writing to inquire whether the board is aware of certain scheduling irregularities and potential conflicts of interest related to the executive director's recent activities. Specifically, I have observed patterns suggesting that organizational resources may be used for purposes inconsistent with the nonprofit's mission and tax-exempt status. While I prefer to remain anonymous at this time to avoid any retaliatory action, I believe the board should be aware that Mr. Monroe's calendar frequently shows availability during hours when the office is occupied, and there are questions about whether consulting services are being provided to all clients with the same level of professionalism and oversight. I trust the board will investigate these matters appropriately and ensure that the organization maintains the ethical standards expected of a 501c3 entity. Vague enough to avoid legal exposure, specific enough to plant doubt. The reference to tax-exempt status was key. Nonprofit boards took that stuff seriously because the consequences of misconduct could affect the entire organization. I hit send and went to work. That evening, I drove to the warehouse. Didn't park in my usual spot. Too predictable. Instead, I found a position on the street 2 blocks away where I could still see the parking lot through a gap between buildings. Madeline's car arrived at 6:45. Caleb was already there. His car had been in its usual spot since I'd done a drive-by at 5:30. They were inside for 3 hours. I waited the whole time, listening to a podcast about municipal planning failures. Kept my mind occupied while my hands stayed patient on the steering wheel. At 9:48, Caleb came out first, alone. He stood by his car for a moment, checking his phone, his posture different from usual. Tense, worried. He got in his car and left. Madeline emerged 10 minutes later. She looked at her phone for a long time before getting in her car, and even from a distance I could see the frown on her face. The next morning I called Nolan Pierce again. "Hey, Daniel. What's up?" "That nonprofit you mentioned, Advancement Services. Do they rent the whole second floor or just part of it?" "Just part. About 1,500 square feet. Why?" "Who else is on that floor?" "Design studio. Small law practice that mostly does contract work. And I think there's a solo consultant or something. Why are you asking?" "The design studio? They have the space next to the nonprofit?" "Yeah. Shared wall. Had to do extra soundproofing during the renovation because the studio wanted to run music during work hours." "Perfect. Thanks, Nolan." "Daniel, is everything okay? You've been asking a lot of questions about that building." "Just curious. Thanks for the help." I hung up before he could push further. The design studio was called Meridian Creative. Their website showed the usual portfolio of logo designs and brand identity work. 3 employees, all young, all photographed in that casually professional way that suggested they took themselves very seriously. Their contact page listed office hours, Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 6. That meant people next door. People who might notice irregular comings and goings. People who might have already noticed but hadn't thought anything of it yet. I filed that information away and went to my next inspection, a commercial roof replacement that had been done without proper permits. The contractor was annoyed when I red-tagged it, but rules were rules. You can't just do whatever you want and hope no one notices. That night, Madeline came home earlier than usual, 8:30 instead of her recent midnight arrivals. She went straight upstairs without saying anything. Around 10, I heard her on the phone. Her voice was too low to make out specific words, but the tone was clear, frustrated, defensive, trying to explain something. The call lasted 15 minutes. When she came back downstairs for water, I was in the kitchen reading a permit application on my laptop. "Everything okay?" I asked. She startled slightly, hadn't realized I was there. "Fine. Work stuff. This late? It's a client on the West Coast. Different time zone. Makes sense. She filled a glass of water, drank half of it, stared at the rest like it might contain answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. Daniel, she said finally. Yeah? Do you? She stopped, started again. Are we going to keep doing this? Doing what? Living like roommates, barely speaking, just existing in the same space. What would you prefer? I don't know, something different, something that feels less... She waved her hand vaguely. Less what? Less hostile. I closed my laptop and looked at her directly. I'm not being hostile. I'm just not pretending anymore. Pretending what? That we're still married in any meaningful way. She set down the water glass with more force than necessary. You're the one who won't talk to me. You're the one who moved into the guest room. You're the one who acts like I don't exist. And you're the one who told my parents you were exploring other options while holding my hand. I apologized for that. No, you explained it away. That's different. She stared at me, and I watched her try to figure out whether I knew more than I was saying, whether this was still about that one comment or about something bigger. I'm trying, she said finally. I'm trying to make this work, but you won't meet me halfway. There is no halfway, Madeline. You've already made your choice. You're just too comfortable to commit to it. What does that mean? It means you want to keep the house and the marriage and the respectability while also having whatever else you're having on the side, and I'm not interested in being part of that arrangement anymore. Her face went pale. I don't know what you think. I don't think anything. I know. I opened my laptop again, returned my attention to the screen. But you're right. We should probably figure out something different. I'll talk to a lawyer after Thanksgiving. A lawyer? You mean like, for a... Yeah, for that. She stood there for another moment, then grabbed her water glass and went upstairs. I finished reviewing the permit application, sent my notes to Tommy, and went to bed. The next day I received 3 responses to my anonymous email. 2 were from board members acknowledging receipt and promising to bring the matter up at their meeting. Professional, careful, exactly what you'd expect from people who took governance seriously. The 3rd was from the board president, a woman named Sharon Kellerman who'd spent 30 years in nonprofit management. Her response was more direct. Thank you for bringing these concerns to our attention. The board takes all allegations regarding executive conduct seriously. We will be reviewing Mr. Monroe's activities and documentation as part of our regular oversight process. If you have specific information that would assist our review, please provide it. Otherwise, we will conduct our own assessment and determine appropriate next steps. She wanted details, but giving details would require proof I didn't have, or rather, proof I couldn't provide without revealing that I'd been conducting surveillance. I didn't respond. The seed was planted. That was enough. On Tuesday evening, the night of the board meeting, I stayed home. Didn't drive by the warehouse, didn't check on anything. Just stayed in the guest room and read a book about structural engineering failures while Madeline worked late again. She came home at 11:30. I heard her talking on the phone in the driveway before coming inside, her voice sharp, irritated. The next morning she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her usual carefully maintained appearance slightly cracked. Rough night? I asked when we crossed paths in the kitchen. Something like that. Work stress? She poured coffee with shaking hands. Client issues. Nothing I want to talk about. Fair enough. I left for work and spent the day thinking about next steps. The email to the board was just the opening move, a way to introduce uncertainty, to make Caleb question whether his world was as secure as he thought. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. That evening I drove to Heritage Oaks again, parked on the side street with the good view, watched the house as the lights came on one by one. Patricia came home first with the girls. Caleb arrived 20 minutes later. The family routine played out in silhouette against the lit windows, figures moving through kitchen, living room, upstairs bedrooms. From outside, it looked perfect, safe, normal. I took a photo of the house with all the lights on, added it to my collection, and drove away. Thanksgiving came on cold and clear. Madeline went to her parents' house in Connecticut. I went to mine. We drove separately, told our respective families the other had conflicting obligations, maintained the fiction that everything was fine. My mother knew better. She'd stopped asking direct questions, but I could see it in the way she looked at me, worried, sad, waiting for me to tell her something she probably already suspected. You know you can talk to us, she said while we were cleaning up after dinner. I know, Mom. About anything. I know. She dried a plate in silence, then said, Your father thinks you're planning something. I looked at her. Did he say that? Not in those words. But he knows you. He says when you get quiet like this, it means you're working through a problem, methodically. That's what I do. Work through problems. Just make sure you're working through them the right way. I didn't know what the right way was anymore, but I knew the wrong way was doing nothing. After Thanksgiving, things accelerated. On Monday morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Usually I let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Daniel Hargreaves? Speaking. This is Sharon Kellerman. I'm the board president for Nonprofit Advancement Services. Do you have a moment to talk? I pulled over into a gas station parking lot. What's this about? I received an anonymous email last week raising concerns about our executive director. The email came from an account that appears to be a temporary address, but the message contained information suggesting the sender has direct knowledge of our operations. I'm calling because our IT consultant traced the general location of the email to this region, and given some of the specific details mentioned, I thought you might have insight. My heart rate increased slightly, but my voice stayed level. I'm not sure why you'd think that. You're a municipal inspector. Your work involves oversight of commercial properties, including the building where our nonprofit is located. The email referenced scheduling irregularities and resource usage in ways that suggested familiarity with our facility. She was smart. Too smart. I inspect a lot of buildings, I said. That doesn't mean I know anything about the tenant's internal operations. Of course, I apologize if I've overstepped. But if you do happen to notice anything in your professional capacity that seems irregular, I'd appreciate you passing that information along through proper channels. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hargreaves. She hung up. I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about that call. She'd connected dots I hadn't expected anyone to connect, which meant I needed to be more careful, or maybe it meant I needed to move faster. That evening, I drove to the coffee shop near the warehouse. Didn't park in my usual spot. Sharon Kellerman's call had made me cautious. Instead, I parked 2 streets over and walked, hands in my coat pockets against the November cold. The warehouse was lit up on the 2nd floor. I could see figures moving past the windows, one of them clearly Caleb, based on height and build. I walked past slowly, pretending to be on my phone. As I passed the entrance, a woman came out, mid-50s, professional clothes, carrying a briefcase. Sharon Kellerman. Had to be. She walked to a car parked nearby, got in, sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Through her windshield, I could see her making notes on something. She was conducting her investigation, taking it seriously. I kept walking, circled the block, came back from a different direction. By the time I returned to my car, Kellerman was gone, and the 2nd floor lights were starting to go out. I drove home to find Madeline already there, sitting in the dark living room with her phone in her lap. Daniel, she said when I turned on the light. Yeah? We need to talk. Actually talk. I set down my keys. About what? About us. About what's happening. About... She stopped, seemed to reconsider her words. About where this is going. I told you. I'm talking to a lawyer after the holidays. What if I don't want that? You don't get to decide by yourself. She stood up, crossed her arms. I made a mistake, okay? That thing I said at dinner, it was awful and thoughtless, and I hurt you. I've been trying to show you I'm sorry, but you won't even let me try. How have you been trying? By staying, by not giving up on us, by working late 4 nights a week? Her face shifted. My job is demanding. I'm sure it is. What's that supposed to mean? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd convinced herself that if she just maintained the lie long enough, it would become true. That if she kept showing up to the house, kept wearing the ring, kept saying the right words, eventually everything would reset and I'd forget. It means, I said carefully, that I know you're not actually working late, and I know you haven't been for months, and I'm done pretending I don't know that. The color drained from her face. Daniel, I'm not going to make a scene. I'm not going to yell or throw things or demand explanations. I'm just done. With the lying, with the performance, with all of it. I don't know what you think you know. Caleb Monroe, she froze. Nonprofit Advancement Services, I continued. 2nd floor of the warehouse on Industrial Drive. You've been there 3 or 4 times a week since June, usually arriving around 6, leaving around 9 or 10, sometimes later. You've been following me? I've been paying attention. There's a difference. She sat back down, her hands shaking. How long have you known? Long enough. Why didn't you say anything? What would have been the point? You would have denied it, or tried to explain it away, or told me I was being paranoid. Easier to just watch. She looked up at me, and for the first time in months, I saw something genuine in her expression. Fear. "What are you going to do?" "I haven't decided yet." That was a lie. I'd decided weeks ago, but letting her sit with the uncertainty felt appropriate somehow. "Please," she said, "please don't do anything crazy. We can work this out. I'll end it. We can go to counseling. We can—" "You already asked about counseling. I said no." "That was before you knew. Now that everything's out in the open, we can actually deal with it. Really deal with it." I picked up my keys again. "I'm going for a drive. I'll be back later." "Daniel, wait." But I was already out the door. I drove without destination for an hour, just moving through the dark streets of town, thinking about the look on Madeline's face when I'd said Caleb's name, the way her careful composure had finally cracked. Eventually, I ended up at my parents' house. The living room lights were still on. My father answered the door in his usual silence, stepped aside to let me in. My mother was already in her robe, reading in her chair by the lamp. "Daniel," she said, "what's wrong?" "Can I stay here tonight?" They exchanged a look. Then my mother said, "Of course. Your room's always ready." My father went to the closet, pulled out spare blankets, even though my room already had everything I needed. My mother put water on for tea I wasn't going to drink. Neither of them asked questions. I sat in the living room with them for a while, not talking, just existing in the comfortable silence of the house I'd grown up in. Finally, my mother said, "Whatever's happening, you'll figure it out." "I know." "And you know we're here. Whatever you need." "I know." My father spoke then, the first words he'd said since I arrived. "Sometimes the right thing feels wrong. That doesn't mean it is wrong." I looked at him. He was watching me with that same flat, assessing expression he'd had at the dinner when Madeline had said her line. Not judging, just observing. "Thanks, Dad." I went upstairs to my old room, lay down on the bed I'd slept in through high school, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I returned to the house on Saturday afternoon. Madeline's car was gone. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter saying she'd be at her parents' through the weekend, giving me space to think. The note ended with, "Please don't do anything rash. We can fix this." I crumpled the note and threw it away. Then I went to my computer and pulled up everything I'd collected over the past 5 months. Photos, notes, timelines, documentation. I organized it all into a single folder and backed it up 3 different ways. Not because I planned to use it. That would be too simple, too impersonal. But because having it gave me leverage if I needed it later. On Monday, I called in sick to work. First time in 2 years. Tommy texted asking if I was okay. I told him I'd caught something over Thanksgiving, needed a day to recover. Instead, I spent the day executing the final phase. First stop, the design studio next to nonprofit advancement services. I walked in wearing my inspector badge, carrying a clipboard, looking official. The receptionist, early 20s, purple hair, multiple ear piercings, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Municipal inspection follow-up. Quick check on the HVAC system, shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. "Oh, nobody told us about an inspection." Routine follow-up. The contractor who did your system had some issues with another property, so we're verifying all their installations. Nothing to worry about. She looked uncertain, but nodded. "Okay. Do you need access to anything specific?" "Just the mechanical room and a quick look at the ductwork. Mind if I poke around?" "I guess that's fine." I spent 20 minutes moving through their space with my clipboard, taking notes that meant nothing, occasionally checking vents and tapping on pipes. But what I was really doing was listening. The wall between the studio and the nonprofit space was thin. Not thin enough to hear conversations clearly, but thin enough that sound carried. And if sound carried one way, it carried both ways. "You guys have any issues with noise from next door?" I asked casually. "The nonprofit? Sometimes. They have meetings that get kind of loud. But it's not usually a problem." "What about after hours? Ever hear anything when their office is supposedly closed?" She frowned. "Actually, yeah. Sometimes I work late. We have a deadline this week, and I'll hear people moving around over there. But their calendar always says they're closed by 6. "Huh. Interesting." I made a note on my clipboard. "Well, everything looks fine with your HVAC. Thanks for your time." I left and walked straight to my car, pulled out my phone and composed a text to an anonymous number I'd set up specifically for this purpose. Sent it to the Nonprofit Advancement Services main line. "Board should know. ED using office after hours for non-business purposes. Ask Design Studio next door what they've heard." Then I drove to Heritage Oaks. This time I didn't park discreetly. I pulled right up in front of Caleb's house in the middle of the afternoon. Left my car running, walked up to his door, rang the bell. Patricia answered. Mid-40s, wearing yoga pants and a fleece pullover. Friendly smile that wavered when she saw I wasn't someone she recognized. "Can I help you? Is Caleb home?" "He's at work. Can I ask who's—" "I'm Daniel Hargreaves. I need to talk to your husband about something." Her smile vanished completely. "About what?" "It's personal, but you should probably hear it too." She stared at me, and I watched understanding begin to dawn in her eyes. Not complete understanding, not yet, but the first glimmer that something was very wrong. "I think you should leave," she said. "Your husband's been having an affair with my wife for the past 6 months. His office, usually after hours. I thought you should know before someone else told you." Her face went white. You can't just... I have photos if you need proof, dates, times, locations, but honestly, you probably already suspected something was off. People always do. Get away from my house. I'm leaving, but you should ask him about Madeline Hargreaves, and you should ask him soon because his board of directors is about to start asking questions too. I walked back to my car, got in, drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Patricia standing in her doorway, her phone already at her ear. Next, I drove to the warehouse. Caleb's car was in its usual spot. I parked next to it and went inside. The nonprofit's office was on the second floor, up a flight of stairs that opened into a small waiting area. Generic corporate furniture, motivational posters, a desk where a receptionist probably sat during normal business hours. Caleb was in his office, door open, hunched over his laptop, tie loosened. He looked up when I walked in, and confusion crossed his face. "Can I help you?" "You're Caleb Monroe." "Yes, and you are?" "Daniel Hargreaves. You've been having an affair with my wife." He stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. That's not... She'll be here soon. She doesn't know I know yet, but she's going to figure it out pretty quick after I leave. Thought you should have a heads up." "You need to leave, right now." "I'm leaving, but before I go, you should know. Your wife knows too. Just told her about 20 minutes ago. And your board's investigating you for misuse of facilities. I'd expect that to get a lot more complicated over the next few days." His face had gone from red to pale in seconds. "You told Patricia?" "Someone had to." "You can't just... You have no right..." "Neither did you." I turned to leave, then stopped. Looked back at him. He was standing frozen behind his desk, his hands gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Here's the thing about pressure," I said. "You don't have to push hard. You just have to know exactly where to push, and you gave me all the leverage I needed when you decided my wife was worth the risk." "I never meant..." "I don't care what you meant. I care what you did, and now you get to live with it." I left him there and drove straight to our house. Madeline was home. She came running out when I pulled into the driveway, her face frantic. "Daniel, what did you do?" "Caleb just called me. He said you went to his house, you told Patricia..." I got out of the car, walked past her to the front door. "Daniel, stop. We need to talk about this." I unlocked the door, went inside. She followed, still talking, her voice climbing higher. "You had no right. You don't understand. It's not what you think. We were going to end it anyway. We just needed time to figure out." I went to the bedroom, the one that used to be ours, and pulled out the suitcase from the closet. Started packing my things. "What are you doing?" "Leaving." "You can't just leave. This is your house too." "You can have it. I'll talk to my lawyer about the details." She grabbed my arm. "Please, Daniel. Please stop and listen to me. I made a mistake, okay? A huge mistake. But we can fix this. We can still fix this." I pulled my arm free and continued packing. "There's nothing to fix. It's done." "It's not done. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I got confused. I made bad choices, but I still... You stopped loving me in May, maybe before. You just didn't bother to tell me. That's not true." I zipped up the suitcase, grabbed my laptop bag, looked at her one more time. She was crying now, mascara running. That careful image she maintained completely destroyed. "I spent 5 months watching you lie to me," I said. "Watching you walk out the door to spend time with him while pretending you were working late. Watching you come home and act like everything was normal. And you know what the worst part was? You thought I was too stupid to notice." "I never thought that." "Yes, you did. That's why you said what you said at dinner, because you believed I was too weak to do anything about it. Too comfortable, too invested in the status quo." I picked up my suitcase. "Turns out you were wrong." "Daniel, please..." But I was already walking out. I got in my car and drove away while she stood in the driveway, still crying, still calling my name. I didn't look back. 3 days later, I got a call from Sharon Kellerman. "Mr. Hargreaves, this is Sharon Kellerman. We spoke last week about concerns regarding nonprofit advancement services. I remember. I wanted to thank you for the information you provided. While I can't discuss personnel matters in detail, I can tell you that the board has taken appropriate action regarding Mr. Monroe's conduct. He's no longer with the organization. I see. I'm also calling because I want to clarify that while we appreciate citizens bringing concerns to our attention, the method of information gathering in this case raised some questions. I trust that all future communications will go through proper channels. Understood. Thank you, Mr. Hargreaves. She hung up. 2 weeks after that, I signed a lease on an apartment across town. Small, quiet, no memories attached. I moved my things in over a weekend, set up my computer in the second bedroom, hung no pictures on the walls. Madeline texted me every day for the first week. Long messages full of apologies and explanations and promises. I read each one and deleted it without responding. Eventually, the messages stopped. I heard through Tommy, who heard through someone else, that Caleb and Patricia were separated, that the nonprofit had brought in an interim director while they searched for a permanent replacement, that there had been some sort of scandal, but nobody knew the exact details. I didn't follow up, didn't need to. On a cold Saturday in December, my father called. How are you doing? Fine. Your mother wants you to come for dinner. I'll be there. When I arrived that evening, both my parents were waiting. My mother hugged me too tight again. My father shook my hand and studied my face with that same assessing expression. Over dinner, pot roast again, like always, my mother talked about the neighbors and the weather and everything except what we were all thinking about. My father ate in silence, saying nothing. Finally, as we were clearing dishes, he said, "You did what you needed to do." I looked at him. Not saying it was right, he continued. Not saying it was wrong. Just saying sometimes a man has to draw a line. My mother touched his arm but didn't say anything. I helped them finish the dishes, stayed for coffee, drove back to my apartment as the first snow of the season started to fall. That night, I sat in my empty living room and thought about everything that had happened. The careful way I'd documented everything, the methodical way I'd applied pressure, the cold precision with which I'd dismantled 2 lives. I'd become the villain of my own story. I understood that clearly now, not because of what Madeline and Caleb had done, but because of how I'd responded. The calculated cruelty of telling Patricia in person, the deliberate destruction of Caleb's professional reputation, the way I'd turned their private mistake into public consequence. But I couldn't find it in myself to regret it. They'd taken something from me, not just my marriage, but my willingness to trust, my ability to believe that people meant what they said, and in return, I'd shown them exactly what happens when someone stops being careful and starts being deliberate. Maybe that made me worse than them. Maybe it made me exactly what they'd turned me into. I didn't know anymore. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering everything in white. Clean, new, like none of it had happened at all. But I remembered every moment, every choice, every pressure point, and I knew I'd remember for the rest of my life.